The first snowflake landed on Julia Jensen's bare shoulder as she stood on the auction platform, and she knew her life would never be the same. The year was 1878, and the November cold bit through the thin cotton dress that barely covered her trembling body. Her father's gambling debts had finally caught up with their family, and the price was her freedom. Around her, men gathered like vultures, their breath steaming in the frigid air as they appraised her like livestock. She was 20 years old, and this frozen morning in Lordsburg, New Mexico, was supposed to be impossible. Snow in the high desert was rare, but there it fell, soft and relentless, covering the dusty streets in a blanket of white that made everything look deceptively pure. "Gentlemen, we'll start the bidding at $50, the auctioneer called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Julia kept her eyes fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to look at the faces below. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Her hands were bound loosely in front of her, more for show than restraint. Where would she run in this weather, in this town where everyone knew everyone else's business? $50, a gravelly voice called from the back. 60, another countered. Julia's stomach churned. She had watched her mother cry for 3 days straight before the sheriff came to take her. Her father had disappeared 2 weeks prior, leaving nothing but debt and broken promises. The territorial law was clear. Debts could be paid in labor, and if the debtor fled, family members could be contracted out until the debt was satisfied. It was a polite word for something much uglier: $100. The new voice was different, deeper and calmer than the others. It carried authority without being loud. Julia's eyes flickered toward the sound despite herself. A tall man stood near the edge of the crowd, his wide-brimmed hat dusted with snow. He wore a heavy coat and leather chaps, and even from a distance, she could see the strong line of his jaw and the steadiness in his posture. The crowd went silent. $100 was more than twice what anyone had bid so far. It was real money, the kind that could buy good horses or cattle. 100 going once, the auctioneer said, his eyes lighting up with greed. Going twice. He paused, scanning the crowd for any challengers. Sold to Lucas Vance. Julia's knees nearly gave out. Lucas Vance. She had heard that name before. He owned a ranch west of town, a successful operation that he had built from nothing after returning from the war. People said he was fair but hard, the kind of man who kept his word and expected others to do the same. She did not know if that made her situation better or worse. The auctioneer gestured for her to step down. Her legs felt like lead as she descended the wooden steps, snow crunching beneath her thin boots. Lucas Vance moved through the crowd toward her, and she got her first clear look at him. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered from years in the sun, but there was something gentle in his expression that surprised her. "Can you ride?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded and turned to the auctioneer, counting out bills from a worn leather wallet. The transaction was completed with businesslike efficiency, papers signed and witnessed. Julia was handed a thick wool coat, which Lucas had brought with him. "Put this on before you freeze," he said, draping it over her shoulders. It smelled like leather and pine, and it was the warmest thing she had felt in days. He led her to where 2 horses stood tied to a hitching post. One was a large bay gelding, the other a smaller chestnut mare. Without a word, he helped her onto the mare, his hands respectful and quick. Then he swung up onto the bay, and they rode out of town as the snow continued to fall. They traveled in silence for the first hour. The landscape was surreal under its white coating, the scrub brush and cacti transformed into strange sculptures. Julia's mind raced with questions and fears. What would he expect from her? She had heard stories about men who bought women at debt auctions, and none of them ended well. She clutched the reins tightly, her fingers numb despite the coat. "You hungry?" Lucas asked, breaking the silence. She realized she was starving. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. "Yes." He pulled his horse to a stop near a cluster of juniper trees that provided some shelter from the wind. From his saddlebag, he produced a cloth-wrapped package containing cornbread and dried beef. He handed half to her without ceremony. "Thank you," she said, accepting it carefully. They ate standing, the horses snuffling softly beside them. Julia watched him from the corner of her eye. He did not look at her with the hunger she had seen in other men's faces. Instead, he seemed focused on the horizon, always scanning, always alert. "My ranch is about 2 more hours west," he said. "It's not fancy, but it's warm and the roof does not leak. You will have your own room." His words took a moment to sink in. "My own room? I am not that kind of man, Miss Jensen," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "I paid your father's debt, which means you owe me labor, not anything else. You will work and you will earn your freedom back fairly. That is the arrangement." Relief flooded through her so suddenly that her eyes stung with tears. She blinked them back quickly. "What kind of work?" "Ranch work. Cooking, mending, helping with the horses if you really can ride. I have 3 hired men, but we are heading into winter and there is always more to do than hands to do it." "Can you shoot?" The question surprised her. "My father taught me when I was younger." "Good. You will need to know how out here. We get coyotes sometimes, and last year a mountain lion took one of my calves." They finished eating and mounted up again. The snow had stopped, but the sky remained heavy and gray. As they rode, Lucas pointed out landmarks: a distinctive rock formation, a dry creek bed that would run full in spring, the boundary of his land marked by a split-rail fence. The ranch came into view as the sun was beginning its descent. It was modest but well-maintained, with a main house, a barn, a corral, and a few outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and Julia could see cattle in the distance, dark shapes against the white ground. A man emerged from the barn as they approached. He was older, probably in his 50s, with a thick gray beard and a permanent squint from years in the sun. "Lucas, you are back," the man called. "Brought company, I see." "This is Miss Jensen. She will be helping around the place. Julia, this is Pete Holloway, my foreman." Pete touched his hat brim politely. "Madam, pleased to meet you," Julia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Pete, can you see to the horses? I will get Miss Jensen settled in the house." "Sure thing, boss." Lucas helped her down from the mare and she followed him to the house. The inside was warm and surprisingly neat. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A table and chairs sat near the window, and she could see 2 doors leading to other rooms. "That is my room," Lucas said, pointing to one door. "This one is yours." He opened the other door to reveal a small but clean bedroom with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A quilt in shades of blue and white covered the bed. "My mother made that quilt before she passed. I think she would want someone to use it." Julia stepped into the room, hardly believing it was real. A space of her own, a real bed, warmth. "It is beautiful." "There is water in the pitcher. Dinner will be ready in about an hour." "Pete and the other men usually eat in the bunkhouse, but tonight I figured we should talk about how things are going to work here." She turned to face him, suddenly aware of how tall he was, how his presence filled the small doorway. "Why did you do this? Buy my debt, I mean. You do not know me." He was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "I knew your father, actually, years ago before the war. He was not always the way he turned out. I figured his daughter deserved better than what was happening to her in that town square." He cleared his throat, looking almost embarrassed. "Anyway, get yourself settled. I will be in the kitchen if you need anything." After he left, Julia sank onto the bed, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and relief. She had expected so many terrible things and instead found herself in a warm house with a man who spoke of fairness and freedom. She did not know if she could trust it, if she could trust him, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a tiny spark of hope. That evening they sat at the table together, eating stew that Lucas had made himself. It was simple but good, thick with potatoes and beef. He explained the routine of the ranch, the daily chores, what would be expected of her. His tone was matter-of-fact, businesslike. He was offering her work, not salvation, and somehow that made it easier to accept. "Your father's debt was $240, he said, pulling out a ledger. "I am paying you fair wages, $30 a month plus room and board. By my calculation, you will work off the debt in 8 months, maybe less if we have a good calving season and I can offer a bonus." Julia stared at the numbers he had written down. 8 months, it was not forever, it was a finish line she could actually see. That is more than fair. "I believe in honest work for honest pay. You will earn every cent." He closed the ledger. "Rules are simple. Pull your weight. Do not steal. Do not lie to me. I will do the same for you." "Deal." He extended his hand across the table. Julia looked at it, at the calluses and scars that spoke of hard labor, and then at his face. His expression was open, sincere. She reached out and clasped his hand. His grip was firm but careful, and she felt that spark of hope grow a little brighter. "Deal," she said. The first weeks at the ranch were harder than Julia had expected. She woke before dawn to start breakfast for Lucas and the hired men, learning quickly what they liked and how much they could eat. Then there was washing, mending, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, and 100 other tasks that filled the days until she fell into bed exhausted each night. Her hands, which had been soft from town living, became rough and calloused. Her back ached from hauling water and wood. But slowly, gradually, she began to feel something she had not felt in a long time: useful. Lucas was patient with her mistakes, showing her how to do things properly rather than criticizing when she got them wrong. When she ruined a batch of biscuits, he ate them anyway, and calmly explained that she needed to work the dough less. When she left a gate open and 2 horses wandered out, he helped her round them up without a word of anger, then showed her the proper way to latch it. "Everybody makes mistakes," he said. "What matters is learning from them." The other men on the ranch were respectful if distant. Pete was the most talkative, often sharing stories about his years as a cowboy while Julia prepared meals. The other 2, brothers named Tom and Henry Walsh, were younger and shy, barely meeting her eyes when she served them food. As December arrived and the snow persisted, Julia began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. She discovered she liked working with the animals, especially the horses. There was a young filly in the barn, skittish and half wild, that no one had been able to get close to. Julia started spending her free time near the filly's stall, talking softly and offering treats. Slowly, the horse began to trust her. Lucas noticed, of course. He noticed everything. One afternoon, he leaned against the barn door, watching as Julia fed the filly an apple from her palm. "You have got a gift," he said. Julia looked up, startled. She had not heard him approach. She just needed someone to be patient with her. Most people would not bother. They would say she is too much trouble. He moved closer, his movements slow and deliberate so as not to spook the horse. "But I think the ones that are hardest to reach are usually worth the effort." Something in his tone made Julia's heart skip. She glanced at him and found him looking at her, not the horse. The moment stretched between them, charged with something unspoken, before he cleared his throat and stepped back. I need to ride out to the north pasture tomorrow to check on the herd. Thought you might want to come along, see more of the ranch. I would like that, Julia said, meaning it. They rode out the next morning, their breath fogging in the cold air. The snow had mostly melted except in shaded areas, leaving the ground muddy and treacherous. Lucas led the way confidently, pointing out different parts of his land, telling her about his plans to expand the herd in the spring. I have been saving for 3 years to buy the section to the west, he said. There is a creek that runs year-round, good grazing. If I can make it through this winter with the herd intact, I should have enough. How did you start all this? Julia asked, if you do not mind me asking. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. After the war, I had nothing but a horse and a few dollars in pay. I hired on at a ranch in Texas, worked there for 5 years, and saved every penny. When I heard about land opening up here in the territory, I came and staked a claim. Built that house with my own 2 hands. He paused. It is not much, but it is mine. Nobody can take it from me. Julia heard the weight in those words. The war was bad for you. War is bad for everyone, he said simply. But I survived, which is more than a lot of men can say. Seemed wrong to waste the chance I had been given. They reached the north pasture, and Lucas counted the cattle, checking for signs of illness or injury. Julia watched him work, noting the gentle way he approached the animals, the careful attention he paid to each one. He was not just a rancher, he was a caretaker, someone who took responsibility seriously. On the ride back, they stopped to rest the horses near a stand of cottonwoods. Lucas pulled out a canteen and offered it to her first. As she drank, he said, "You are doing good work, Julia. I want you to know that." The sound of her first name on his lips sent warmth through her chest. He rarely used it, usually keeping things formal. "Thank you, I am trying. I know this is not the life you would have chosen, but you are making the best of it, and that takes strength." She handed back the canteen, their fingers brushing briefly. "I had a choice on that platform. I could have broken, let them see me as a victim, but I decided that whoever bought me, I would show them I was worth more than $50. A slow smile crossed Lucas's face, transforming his serious features into something almost boyish. "You are worth a hell of a lot more than that." The air between them shifted again, and Julia felt her pulse quicken. She had been trying not to think about Lucas as anything other than her employer, the man she owed a debt to. But it was becoming harder to ignore the way her heart lifted when he entered a room, or how she found herself watching for him throughout the day. Christmas came quietly to the ranch. Lucas had Pete cut down a small pine tree, which they set up in the main room. Julia made decorations from scraps of fabric and paper, and Lucas surprised everyone by producing a crate of oranges and peppermint sticks he had ordered from town. On Christmas Eve, after the hired men had retired to the bunkhouse, Lucas and Julia sat by the fire. He had given her a present earlier, a pair of good leather gloves that fit perfectly. She had given him a scarf she had knitted in secret over the past weeks, working on it late at night by lamplight. "I have not had a real Christmas in years," Lucas admitted, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "After my folks died, it seemed pointless to celebrate alone." "You are not alone now," Julia said softly. He looked at her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "No, I am not." He seemed to wrestle with something, then said, "Julia, I need to tell you something. The debt you owe, the money your father left behind. I know I said 8 months, but I want you to understand something. When that time is up, if you want to stay, you would be welcome. As a paid employee, I mean, I would hate to lose a good worker." Her heart sank a little at his words. A good worker, is that all she was to him? But what had she expected? She was here because of debt and circumstance, not choice. Still, she had hoped these past weeks that maybe he felt something of what she was beginning to feel. "Thank you," she said, keeping her voice even. "That is good to know." The silence that followed was heavy. Lucas seemed about to say something else, but then thought better of it. He stood abruptly. "I should turn in. Early start tomorrow." "Of course. Good night, Lucas." "Good night." After he left, Julia stayed by the fire, feeling foolish. What had she expected? That a man like Lucas Vance would fall in love with a woman he had bought at auction. Life was not a fairy tale, especially not in the harsh reality of the New Mexico territory. January brought bitter cold and ice storms that made outdoor work treacherous. Julia threw herself into her tasks, trying not to think about the growing ache in her chest whenever Lucas was near. But it was impossible not to notice small things. How he always made sure she had enough firewood, how he worried when she went outside in the worst weather, how his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking. One afternoon, a storm rolled in faster than expected. Lucas and Pete were out with the herd, and Julia watched from the kitchen window as the sky turned an ominous black. By the time they returned, the wind was howling and sleet was coming down in sheets. Lucas burst through the door, nearly frozen, his coat stiff with ice. Julia rushed to help him, pulling off his gloves and wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. His lips were blue and he was shaking violently. "Pete," she asked. "Made it to the bunkhouse," Lucas managed through chattering teeth. "Lost 6 head in a ravine, nothing we could do." Julia quickly heated water and made strong coffee laced with whiskey. She put it in his hands, guiding the cup to his mouth. "Drink this. You need to warm up from the inside." He obeyed, his hands shaking so badly that she had to help him hold the cup steady. When he had finished, she said, "You need to get out of those wet clothes. You are going to freeze." "I am fine," he protested, but another violent shiver contradicted his words. "You are not fine. Go change now or I will do it for you." Something flickered in his eyes at her words, but he was too cold to argue. He stumbled toward his room, and Julia quickly set about making more coffee and heating up leftover stew. When he emerged wearing dry clothes and still wrapped in the blanket, some of the blue had left his lips. She made him sit by the fire and put a bowl of hot stew in his hands. This time he could hold it himself. As he ate, color gradually returned to his face. Julia sat beside him, close enough that she could monitor his condition, far enough to maintain propriety. "Thank you," he said finally. "You probably saved me from frostbite. You would have done the same for me, still." He set down the empty bowl and turned to look at her. "Julia, I need to tell you something and I do not know how to say it right." Her breath caught. "What is it?" "These past months, having you here, it has been," he paused, searching for words. "I have not been this content in years, and I know it is not right given how you came to be here. I know I should keep my distance, maintain a professional arrangement, but I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot stop wanting more than just working alongside you each day." Julia's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Lucas, You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know. When your debt is paid, if you decide to leave, I will give you a letter of recommendation and enough money to start fresh wherever you want. I will not keep you here against your will. But if there is any chance that you might feel something for me too, I needed to tell you before." She did not let him finish. Instead, she closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. For a moment, he froze in surprise, and then his arms came around her, pulling her close. The kiss was tender and desperate all at once, months of unspoken longing finally given voice. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Lucas touched her face gently, as if afraid she might disappear. "Julia, I have been falling in love with you since the day you gave me that coat." she said, her voice shaking. I tried not to. I told myself it was foolish, that you were just being kind, but I cannot help it. You are the best man I have ever known. He kissed her again, longer this time, his hands tangling in her hair. When they finally separated, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you. I think I loved you from the moment I saw you on that platform, trying so hard to be brave. I was terrified, she admitted. I know. That is what made your courage so remarkable. He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. I want to do this right, Julia. I want to court you properly, let you make a free choice. Your debt is paid as of tonight. I am tearing up that contract. You stay here because you want to, not because you owe me anything. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Lucas, you do not have to. Yes, I do. I will not have the woman I love bound to me by debt. You deserve to choose your own path. Then I choose you, she said fiercely. I choose this ranch, this life, you. That is my free choice. He kissed her once more, sweetly, reverently, and Julia felt something that had been broken inside her begin to heal. In his arms, she was not a woman who had been sold to pay her father's debts. She was simply Julia, loved and valued for who she was. The storm raged outside, but inside, by the fire, two people found shelter in each other. The next weeks were the happiest Julia had ever known. Lucas courted her with old-fashioned propriety, despite the fact that they lived under the same roof. He brought her wildflowers that somehow bloomed even in winter, wrote her clumsy but heartfelt poems that made her laugh and cry, and treated her with a respect that made her feel cherished. They worked side by side during the day. Their partnership now extended beyond just labor. Lucas consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valuing her opinions. She discovered she had a good head for numbers and began keeping the ranch's books, finding ways to save money and increase efficiency. Pete and the Walsh brothers noticed the change, of course, but they were gentlemen about it. Pete even pulled Julia aside one day and said, "That man has been alone too long. It is good to see him happy." By February, Lucas had officially proposed, presenting her with a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. Julia accepted with tears in her eyes, and they were married in Lordsburg by the circuit judge on a bright, cold Saturday in March. The whole town turned out, curious about the woman who had tamed the serious Lucas Vance. As Julia walked down the aisle of the small church in a dress borrowed from the preacher's wife, she thought about that day in the snow, standing on the auction platform. She had thought her life was ending, but instead, it had been beginning. The man waiting for her at the altar, his face full of love and promise, had given her something she had never expected, a future worth wanting. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet. Lucas treated her like something precious, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and loved. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in his bed, which was now their bed, he whispered promises against her hair. "I will spend every day of my life making you happy," he said. "You already do," she replied, tracing patterns on his chest, "just by being you." Spring came to the ranch in a rush of green and new life. The herd calved successfully, and Lucas's careful planning paid off. He was able to buy the western section with the year-round creek, expanding the ranch significantly. Julia worked with the horses, training the skittish filly and two other young horses that showed promise. Her skill became known in the area, and neighboring ranchers began asking if she would work with their difficult animals. "You should charge them," Lucas said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You have got a valuable skill." "It is not work if you love it," Julia said, leaning against his shoulder. "True, but it is still worth something." He kissed the top of her head. "Maybe we could start breeding horses as well as cattle. You could build a real business." The idea excited her. A business of her own built on something she was good at. Do you really think we could, with you training them? They would be the best horses in the territory. We would have buyers lining up. They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming. This was what Julia loved most about their marriage, the partnership. Lucas never made her feel less than equal. He celebrated her strengths and supported her ambitions. Together, they were building something bigger than either of them could alone. By summer, Julia knew she was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. She need not have worried. His whoop of joy could probably be heard in town. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down, worried he had been too rough. "Are you all right? Should you be sitting down? Do you need anything?" She laughed at his sudden nervousness. "Lucas, I am fine. Women have babies all the time. But not my baby, not my wife." He placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach, his expression full of wonder. "We are going to be parents. We are," she confirmed, covering his hand with hers. "Scared, terrified," he admitted, "but also happier than I have ever been." The pregnancy was not easy. Julia suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and Lucas hovered over her constantly, driving her to distraction with his worrying. But his concern was rooted in love, so she tried to be patient. Pete and the Walsh brothers took on extra duties without complaint, and the whole ranch seemed to reorganize itself around her condition. As her belly grew, Lucas became even more protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy or work with the more unpredictable horses. They argued about it more than once. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she said after he had physically lifted her out of the barn when she tried to muck out a stall. "You are carrying my child. I am not taking any chances." His jaw was set in that stubborn line she had learned to recognize. "Lucas Vance, if you do not let me do something useful, I am going to lose my mind." They compromised. She could keep the books, work with the gentler horses, and manage the household, but nothing that involved heavy lifting or risk. It was not perfect, but it was fair, and Julia had to admit that she tired more easily as the baby grew. In January, almost exactly a year after Lucas had bought her debt, Julia went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that terrified Lucas more than anything he had faced in the war. He paced outside the bedroom door while the doctor from town and Pete's wife, who had experience with birthing, attended to Julia. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. The doctor opened the door, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Vance. And your wife is asking for you." Lucas entered the room to find Julia exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in that blue and white quilt his mother had made. Tears streamed down his face as he approached the bed. "Meet your son," Julia said softly. Lucas took the baby carefully, staring down at the small, red face. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He leaned down to kiss Julia's forehead. Thank you for this gift." They named him James after Julia's grandfather and Lucas's middle name. Little James was a healthy, hungry baby who rarely slept and kept them both exhausted those first weeks. But even in the depths of sleeplessness, Julia had never been happier. One night, as she nursed James while Lucas dozed in a chair beside the bed, she thought about how far she had come. From that auction platform to this warm room, from fear and uncertainty to love and family. She had been sold during the first snow and bought by a cowboy who had made her his partner in every sense of the word. Lucas stirred, opening his eyes to find her watching him. "What are you thinking about?" "How lucky I am," she said simply. "I am the lucky one," he countered. "You and James, you are everything I never knew I needed. Then we are both lucky." He moved to sit on the bed beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders as they both watched their son nurse. "Do you ever regret it?" That day in Lordsburg, Julia considered the question seriously. I regret the circumstances that led to it. I regret what my father did, the position he put me in. But the outcome. She looked up at Lucas, her heart full. I could never regret anything that brought me to you. I love you, Julia Vance, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I love you too, she replied. Always. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Julia's horse training business became known throughout the territory, and they built a second barn specifically for that purpose. They had 3 more children, twin girls named Sarah and Catherine when James was 3, and another son, Matthew, 2 years after that. The house had to be expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. Lucas proved to be an excellent father, patient and playful with the children while still maintaining discipline. Julia watched him teach James to ride, comfort the girls after nightmares, and rock Matthew to sleep, and fell in love with him all over again. He was her partner in every way, splitting the work of both ranch and family with her. Pete eventually retired, turning over the foreman duties to Tom Walsh. He built a small cabin on ranch property and spent his days whittling toys for the children and dispensing advice to anyone who would listen. He was a beloved fixture of their lives, part of the family they had built. Julia never saw her father again. She heard through town gossip that he had died in a card game gone wrong in California, and she felt a complicated mix of grief and relief. He had brought her to rock bottom, but from that lowest point, she had risen to heights she never could have imagined. One winter evening, nearly 10 years after that first snow, Julia and Lucas stood on their porch watching their children play in the yard. James was teaching the twins how to throw a lasso while Matthew toddled after them, demanding to be included. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and peaceful. "You remember when I first brought you here?" Lucas asked, his arm around her waist. "How could I forget?" "I was terrified and trying not to show it." "I knew," he said. "But I also saw your strength. That is what made me bid. I could not stand to see someone that strong be broken by circumstance." Julia leaned into him, comfortable and content. "You did not break me. You saw me when no one else did." "We saw each other," Lucas corrected. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. I was just going through the motions before you came. You gave me a reason to build something worth having." "We built it together," Julia said. "That is what makes it matter." They watched in comfortable silence as the children played, as the sun set over land they had worked and loved and made their own. Tomorrow there would be chores and challenges, the endless work of maintaining a ranch and raising a family. But tonight there was just this: peace, love, and the life they had chosen together. Julia thought about the girl she had been, standing in the snow, terrified and alone. If she could speak to that younger self, what would she say? That the darkness does not last forever. That sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. That love can be found in the most unexpected places. But most of all, she would say this: trust yourself. Trust that you are stronger than you know. Trust that somewhere, someone will see your worth when others see only a price tag. Trust that even when sold during the first snow, you might be bought by someone who makes you a partner, not a possession. Lucas squeezed her waist gently, pulling her from her thoughts. "Cold? No," she said truthfully. "I am exactly where I want to be." He kissed her temple, a gesture so familiar after years of marriage that it felt like coming home. "Good, because I plan to keep you here for the next 50 years at least." "Only 50, she teased. "Forever, then. How does forever sound?" Julia looked up at her husband, at the man who had given her freedom when he could have demanded servitude, who had offered love instead of obligation, who had made her his true partner in building a life. Forever sounds perfect. As they went inside to gather the children for supper, Julia took one last look at the winter landscape. Snow was beginning to fall again. soft flakes drifting down in the twilight. But unlike that day 10 years ago, this snow held no fear. It was just weather, beautiful and temporary, and she was safe in the life she and Lucas had made. The children thundered into the house, bringing cold air and laughter with them. Lucas helped them remove coats and boots while Julia started warming up the stew she had made earlier. This was her life now. Domestic, busy, full of small moments that added up to something profound. After supper, after the children were bathed and put to bed with stories and kisses, Julia and Lucas sat by the fire as they did most evenings. She was mending one of James's shirts while Lucas reviewed the ranch accounts. The domesticity of it might have seemed dull to some, but to Julia it was precious. This peace had been hard-won. "I got a letter from town today," Lucas said, looking up from his ledger. "The territorial governor wants to buy horses for the army, says he has heard about your training methods." Julia's hands stilled on the mending. "That would be a significant contract. It could set us up very well financially. But it would also mean more work, probably hiring additional help." He closed the ledger and gave her his full attention. "What do you think? You are the horse expert." This was what she loved about him. He genuinely wanted her input, valued her expertise. "I think we could do it if we plan carefully. Maybe hire a couple of the boys from town who want to learn ranching, train them up properly. We could offer them the same deal I offered you," Lucas said thoughtfully. "Fair wages, room and board, a chance to learn a trade." Julia smiled. "Giving other people opportunities just like you gave me." "We gave each other opportunities," he corrected. "But yes, if we are successful, I want to share that success with people who need a chance." They talked through the details, making plans and contingencies. By the time they headed to bed, they had the framework of a strategy that could take their ranch to the next level. Lying in bed that night, Julia reflected on how far they had come. From a desperate transaction in the snow to a thriving business and a happy family. She had been given the gift of a second chance, and she had made the most of it. Lucas's arm came around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" "About chances," she said. "About how one moment can change everything." "Do you mean that day in Lordsburg?" "I mean the moment you decided to bid. You did not have to, you could have walked away." "No," he said quietly. "I could not have. Something told me that if I did not act right then, I would regret it for the rest of my life." "Fate," Julia suggested. "Maybe. Or maybe just recognizing something important when I saw it." He kissed her shoulder. "I saw a woman who refused to give up, and I knew I wanted that kind of strength in my life." "You gave me the space to be strong," Julia said. "You could have demanded obedience, submission. Instead, you offered partnership." "That is the only kind of relationship worth having," Lucas said firmly. "We are better together than apart. Always have been." Julia turned in his arms to face him. Even after years of marriage, her heart still skipped when he looked at her with such open love. "I am grateful every day that you were in that crowd. I am grateful you gave me a chance. You could have hated me for the situation, lumped me in with all the other men who saw you as property. But you proved immediately that you were different. The coat, the separate room, the contract. You saw me as a person." She touched his face gently. "You have been seeing me clearly ever since." They made love that night with the comfortable passion of long marriage, knowing each other's bodies and desires intimately. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Julia felt profoundly content. This was love. Not just the passion, but the partnership, the friendship, the daily choice to build a life together. The territorial contract came through, and the ranch entered a period of intense activity. Julia worked with 2 young men from Lordsburg, teaching them her methods for training horses. Lucas expanded the herd and negotiated contracts with other ranchers to buy their cattle at fair prices. The whole operation grew, but they were careful to maintain the values that had guided them from the start: fair dealing, honest work, respect for everyone involved. Their children grew and thrived. James showed an aptitude for ranching that made Lucas beam with pride. The twins were inseparable, always plotting some adventure that usually ended with them covered in mud. Matthew was the gentle one, preferring books and animals to rough play. Julia and Lucas loved them all fiercely, determined to give them the stable, loving childhood neither of them had fully experienced. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Julia into Lordsburg for dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was a rare evening away from the children who were being watched by Pete and his wife. Over steak and potatoes, they talked about everything and nothing, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. "You remember our wedding?" Lucas asked, refilling her wine glass. "Of course." "You were so nervous you could barely get the words out." "I was terrified you would change your mind at the last second," he admitted, "that you would realize you could do better." Julia laughed. "Better than the man who saved me, courted me, made me his equal partner and gave me 4 beautiful children. Not possible." "I am serious," Lucas said. "You were so far out of my league, still are. Lucas Vance, you are the best man I know. You are hardworking, honest, kind, and you love me more than I ever thought possible. You are not out of any league. You set the standard." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I love you more now than the day we married. I did not think that was possible, but you keep proving me wrong." "I love you too," Julia said softly. "More than words can say." Walking back to the hotel where they were staying the night, Lucas pulled her close. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. "Julia, I want you to know something. Everything I have, everything I am, is because of you. You made me want to be better, do more, build something lasting. You are my partner, my love, my everything." Tears pricked Julia's eyes. "You gave me my life back. That day in the snow, I thought I had lost everything. But you showed me that endings can be beginnings, and that love can come from the most unexpected places." They stood there on the quiet street, holding each other, 2 people who had found salvation in each other. The years ahead would bring challenges and changes, but they would face them together, as they always had. As they grew older, the ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. Julia's reputation as a horse trainer spread far and wide, and people came from hundreds of miles away to buy horses she had trained. Lucas's fair dealing and quality cattle made him a respected figure in ranching circles. Together, they employed over a dozen people, all treated fairly and given opportunities to advance. Their children went on to their own successes. James took over the ranch operations when Lucas began to slow down, proving himself a worthy heir to the business his parents had built. The twins married brothers from a neighboring ranch, creating an alliance that benefited both families. Matthew became a teacher in Lordsburg, educating the next generation. As grandchildren began to arrive, Julia and Lucas found new joy in watching the family they had created continue to grow. They spent long evenings on the porch, watching grandchildren play in the same yard where their own children had played, marveling at how life had unfolded. "Did you ever imagine this?" Julia asked one evening, a granddaughter asleep in her lap. "All of this?" Lucas, holding a grandson who was stubbornly fighting sleep, shook his head. "Never. I hoped for success for a family, but this exceeds anything I could have dreamed." "We did well," Julia said with satisfaction. "We did better than well. We built something that will outlast us, something that matters." As the years turned into decades, they watched the ranch continue to thrive under James's capable management. They remained active and involved, but gradually turned over more responsibility to the next generation. It was bittersweet, this slowing down, but also natural. They had earned their rest. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Everyone they had ever employed came, along with neighbors and friends from town. There were speeches and toasts, and Julia found herself overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and respect. When it was Lucas's turn to speak, he stood and pulled Julia up beside him. 30 years ago, I made the best decision of my life. I took a chance on a woman who had been dealt a terrible hand, and she took a chance on me right back. Together, we built all of this. He gestured at the ranch, the people, the family gathered around them. But more importantly, we built a partnership based on love, respect, and equality. That is our real legacy. Not the land or the money, but the example of what two people can do when they see each other as true partners. Julia was crying openly now. "You saved me," she said. "But more than that, you saw me. You saw my potential when others saw only my circumstances. You gave me room to become who I was meant to be. We saved each other," Lucas said firmly, "and we became who we were meant to be together." The celebration lasted long into the night, full of laughter and music and love. As Julia danced with Lucas under the stars, she thought about that terrified girl on the auction platform. If she could send a message back through time, it would be simple: hold on. The best is yet to come. They lived to see all their grandchildren grown and even some great-grandchildren born. They lived to see New Mexico become a state. They lived to see the ranch expand to twice its original size, a testament to 3 generations of hard work and smart decisions. When Lucas finally passed away at the age of 79, Julia was by his side, holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for choosing me. Always," she whispered. "In every life, in every choice, always you." She mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had been given more than 50 years together, and every one of them had been a gift. She lived another 3 years, long enough to see her youngest great-grandchild born, long enough to ensure the ranch would continue in capable hands. On her last day, surrounded by family, Julia reflected on her extraordinary life. From that terrible day in the snow to this peaceful ending, she had lived fully and loved deeply. She had been sold as property but had become a partner, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a successful businesswoman. She had taken a terrible circumstance and transformed it into something beautiful. As her eyes closed for the last time, her last thought was of Lucas waiting for her, extending his hand the way he had that first day in Lordsburg. She could almost hear his voice, "Can you ride?" and her answer, then and always, "Yes." The legacy Julia and Lucas left behind was not just the prosperous ranch or the family they had created. It was the example they had set of what partnership could be, of how two people could lift each other up, of how love could transform the worst circumstances into the greatest blessings. Their story was told and retold through generations, a reminder that endings can be beginnings, and that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places. The ranch still stands today, run by their descendants who remember the story of how it all began. With snow falling on an auction platform, a cowboy who saw worth where others saw only price, and a woman who had the courage to say yes to an uncertain future. Together, they had built something that lasted, something that mattered, something that proved that love and partnership could overcome any obstacle. And every winter, when the first snow falls on Lordsburg, the family gathers to remember Julia and Lucas, to celebrate the love story that started it all, and to renew their commitment to the values those two remarkable people embodied: fairness, respect, hard work, and above all, the understanding that we are always better together than apart.